Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore, and after a few technical difficulties, we're still figuring this stuff out. I think we're all figuring a bunch of stuff out as we sort of change a lot of the ways we do things, from doing our podcast to shopping to walking out our door to watching a lot of great movies on VOD. I know it's a rough time. If you're a fan who loves to go to the movies every week, as I do, I love to go to the theater every week. But we're ignoring so many of the great films that you can see on video on demand, and that's where indie films thrive. That's where you get to see so many great independent films and documentaries. And I feel now is a huge opportunity this summer. This is the summer of indies, is what this is. So this podcast, I'm going to bring to light many of the great indie films that are going to be coming out on video on demand that you can just watch in your home. You don't have to go out. You can even text during the movie. You can have an adult beverage, as I often do. I recommend an old fashioned, and just sit and enjoy a really great documentary. I am a longtime comic book fan, which I cannot wait to talk to my guest. My guest did a documentary called My Comic Shop Country. He's the director, Anthony. Let's see if I pronounce this correctly. Desiato. Anthony,
Got it.
What did I get that right, Anthony?
You did on the first try. I'm very impressed.
Oh, that's great. First of all, I'm so happy to have you here to talk about your documentary. Your documentary is, I think, is so timely. It's kind of crazy how timely this doc is. The fact that it's coming out, April 10th?
It's actually out now. So we were originally going to release on April 7th, and then we decided to move it up. It just seemed like there was such a demand for people to have new things to watch and read and listen to. But then on top of that, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but just the state of the comics retail industry, we just felt like, this could actually do some good and really serve a purpose during this time. So it's actually out now on Amazon and iTunes.
So My Comic Shop Country, look for it now. Amazon, video on demand, however you consume your media, you can find it somewhere. It's timely because, everyone is empathetic towards those affected by this global pandemic, right? This crisis. And we think of hospital care workers, people on the front lines. We're also thinking about restaurant workers. I have friends who are bartenders. They're out of work. But this will devastate and destroy an entire industry, and no one's talking about it. And that's comic shops across the country. And comic shops have always kind of teetered on the edge in any ways in terms of being able to stay in business. No one starts a comic shop, and I will say no one probably starts a movie website either, and YouTube channel talking to indie filmmakers to get into it to make money. Like this is all about passion. And you captured it so incredibly well. I have to say I got choked up at the end of your doc. You focus mostly on one particular comic shop, which is the one that you used to go to. Tell us about that comic shop and how you began this journey in this documentary.
Sure. And so, what you're referencing, the alternate realities piece of the movie, that to me is the emotional through line of the movie and kind of its beating heart, because it's, for me, it's extremely personal, and hopefully, viewers are able to connect with it. But so alternate realities, sadly, was a comic shop in Scarsdale, New York, that was in operation from 92 to 2015. So it had a 23-year run. I started shopping there when I was in elementary school, and then I started working there in high school, and I continued on throughout college and even into law school. And the summer after my first year of law school, I decided to make a documentary film about that particular store. I was just always so entertained by our community and the store's owner, Steve, who had a very love-hate relationship with the store and the customers. And so that was my first film. I grabbed a camera and I went off and shot it. I put it up for free on Vimeo a couple weeks ago. So that's out there. If anyone wants to watch that, it's called My Comic Shop Documentary. And then, so I made the film years before the store closed. And when the store closed, I did two things. First, I launched a podcast called My Comic Shop History. And the first season of that is all about the closing of alternate realities. We sort of eulogize it and have a little bit of group therapy over the course of those episodes. But then I started thinking about other stores. And I guess the initial idea was what I experienced at my store, that camaraderie, that sense of community, was that happening elsewhere? And so that was sort of the jumping off point. And so I visited all of these stores across the country, first with my podcast, and then for this new documentary film, My Comic Shop Country.
Well, it's interesting because what I found really fascinating was I used to shop at Dave's Comics. I mean, I discovered comics probably when I don't even remember when I did. I started watching the Adam West Batman TV show when I was 5, then started buying comics at drugstores. I specifically got a newspaper route at 9, so I had pocket change to buy comic books and Aurora model kits. So I'm a definitely a Gen X nerd, well versed in all that. But then I discovered Dave's Comics in Royal Oak, Michigan. Dave's Comics was run by a guy named Dave Huxley. It's so funny how all these comic shops, they're all started by a guy, some passionate person, some dude who's like, I just love comics. And what I found interesting about it was that all of these comic shops kind of have a similar thing, right? They have their regular customers, and it's not just about purchasing comics, right? It's also about community. And I went to Dave's. Yes, I went to Dave's to buy comics, but I could buy comics other places. I went to Dave's to have conversations. I went to Dave's for all of us to debate, those debates, who's stronger, Thor or the Hulk, that came from comic shops, right? That wasn't an online debate. That was a debate that people had in a comic shop with other people. And often, and I'm sure you experienced this at Alternate Realities, a crowd would form. If there's a good argument going, because the one thing as comic fans, I mean, if you're a longtime reader, if you're a longtime fan, you will get that respect, right? Who makes the better argument? I respect the better argument, right? And that sense of community, I cannot believe how every single comic shop has that. Every single comic shop has that enigmatic personality, the person who created the shop and who just runs it, who's always like, I'm not making money. I got, I gotta hang it up. And then that sense of community, those regular customers that, having conversations at comic shops was podcasting before there was podcasting, if you ask me.
Yeah, no, very true. Absolutely.
So what are your thoughts? So you started documenting the alternate realities and the closing of that store, and then traveled around to other comic shops. When did you realize, like, oh my gosh, this experience is not necessarily unique to alternate realities. This community is through comic shops.
Yeah, so I guess with the podcast first, that was really the first time. And it's funny because, I did the documentary about alternate realities, and then I did the podcast initially about alternate reality. So that was really my entire focus. And, the idea of going to other stores obviously had occurred to me, but I guess sort of what held me back, I always wondered, would I be as well equipped to tell their stories? Because I'm an outsider to that store, even though I'm an insider in the industry, but to that particular community, I'm an outsider. So, would I have the tools to tell the story? Would other stores be as open to someone coming in and telling their story? And then again, is the same thing happening there? But it was really when I first started going, initially with the podcast, that I got the sense that this is what's happening. And, it's a big part of the movie, but especially on the podcast, we really got into the business of running the store. And I think that, at least initially for me, I was so fascinated by it. Obviously it's a very distinct and very challenging business model. And that was, I guess, sort of the way in. And then, you see these communities and these conversations, and, we captured a couple of them in the documentary, and it's the sort of thing, like, nothing was staged. It was just, these things just kind of popped up, and it demonstrates exactly what you were just speaking to.
But it's not a reality show. The way that you approach it is very much like, what is this cultural phenomenon? Why is it? And I'm sure that, there are people who don't understand this, who I think there are a lot of new people to the nerd party. And by that, I mean, Marvel movies made nerd culture and comic characters mainstream, right? I have so many friends who never read comics, but they're fans of Captain America or Iron Man because of the Marvel films. And that's great. I really do believe that nerd culture, comic culture, especially having gone to Comic-Con. I went to Comic-Con. My first one was either 89 or 90. It was when I first moved to Los Angeles. I went to San Diego Comic-Con when it was at a college. and it was
Yeah,
all
very different then. Yeah.
very different. And then it was really around 2007, I think, that things started to change. That, you know, Iron Man came out, and there was Twilight was at San Diego Comic-Con, which didn't make sense to a lot of people. But like I say, nerd culture is a big tent, right? It includes a lot of different, you know, the Venn diagram of nerddom is a bunch of circles. A lot of them overlap. But there's something unique about someone who reads a comic, and I can tell you comics that God, I remember a run when the first appearance of Galactus and the Silver Surfer, that 3-issue run, Fantastic Four. I remember reading that as a kid. I mean, I'm probably 9 years old, reading this going, I will never see a movie that will be as good as this comic that I just read. I will never see a movie that's as good. And then this is why every time a Marvel movie starts, that little like flash of comic images, they always do. To me, that's about the legacy. This is where this came from, comic books. I always get choked up because the little kid in me goes, I never thought I would see these characters on screen interacting in a way that I believe is true to those characters. I think that's the thing that Marvel movies get right. But you really capture this, like I say, not in a reality sense, but like, this is why people are so passionate about this. I mean, people are passionate about a lot of things, cars. Some people are passionate about guns. I'm not one of them, but I respect those that follow the laws and are passionate about that. But comic books in particular, it's hard to explain to someone why that is such a passion.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And that's, you know, in terms of, you know, why I wanted to make this movie, you know, obviously I wanted to shine a light on what goes on at these stores and, you know, what it takes to run a successful shop under good circumstances. But, you know, I've always felt that there was potential for this movie to appeal to audiences beyond just the comics initiated fans. And for one reason, exactly what you said, the fact that these movies are so popular, you know, people have an awareness of these characters. The fact that people know who Ant-Man is, you know, like the person on the street knows who Ant-Man, you know, years ago, like that, you would never have seen anything like that. So there's such an awareness now, but people don't always know where these characters come from and their first home in the comic shops. And, you know, that is a piece of the movie as well, this disconnect where movies are making billions of dollars based on these characters, yet comic shops are really not seeing that translate, you know, in terms of people coming into the store. So, yeah, so I guess the popularity of the movies kind of cuts both ways. On the one hand, I think hopefully this makes this movie more appealing to the mass audience because they have that awareness, and then this will show them what goes on at the comic shop level. But then, yeah, you do kind of have this disconnect where people are going to the movies, but it's not necessarily leading to new readers.
Let's talk about the problems facing comic shops today. It's bad. I mean, there's two major things I think that are at issue. One is sort of the conversation in the social zeitgeist, so to speak. The culture is changing, and I think that that's changed comics. And I think that there's some debate about that there may be some comic writers that maybe don't have the kind of respect for the legacy of the characters that longtime fans expect. So there's that at play, right? That's an issue. Although I would argue that I think comic books have always been progressive, especially if you follow the writings of Stan Lee. I mean, I was in FOOM, the Friends of Old Marvel. I never got a no prize, but I read Stan Lee's book about how the no prize happened, which is kind of funny. But I think that comics have always sort of taken on progressive issues, but so some people cite that as a problem. And then there's the more pressing issue right now, which is comic books are not being shipped because of the stay-at-home orders, because people are in quarantine, and so physical comic books are not being printed. I forget the last week that they came out. It may have been a week or two ago.
Mhm.
There are no physical comic books being shipped. This literally kills all comic book shops. It's as if your grocery store wasn't getting food. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. I mean, I know when Diamond Comics distributors announced that they were shutting down and new product wasn't going to be shipped, I know people were, you know, very worried for comic shops and you know, rightfully so. At the same time, you know, what's the alternative? If comics continue to be shipped, but stores have to be closed, I mean, then they're paying for product that they literally can't sell at all. So the Diamond shutdown, I don't know that was, such a death blow. But that being said, stores have found ways to innovate during this time. I mean, stores that are able to, I've seen them doing curbside pickup and delivery in some cases, and they're doing a lot of mail orders. So, I mean, they are finding ways to get comics out there. So, in that sense, if new product were coming out, it seems like, at least a good bunch of stores are finding ways to still continue to sell. So, it's really tough, but, it's a business that's so driven in most cases. And and this is a part of the movie as well, where, some stores are really clinging to that old school model of comics and graphic novels, and others have diversified a little bit more. But I think for any store, still that weekly business is such a major driver. And so when you don't have that, either because there's literally no new product, or even if there is, but people can't step foot in your store, it's a major, major challenge. And, you were getting at this before, but, with a lot of these stores, they're not in it to get rich, and most don't. I mean, some stores are more viable than others, and you see, I think, a range in the movie. The stores in particular that have really mastered the vintage back issue market, I think they're in a much better position than some of the other mom and pop shops that are really more week to week or month to month. But faced with the prospect of even a month of being closed, it's really challenging. I mean, I do worry for a lot of the stores, and and some of the ones that are in the movie as well. But I mean, again, on the bright side, the innovation has been inspiring. Again, these methods that they're implementing to at least do some business and get books out there. So I guess I'll make my plea. If people are watching this and they want to reach out to their local comic shop, I'm sure the store would be happy to take their call or their email and ship something out to them.
Yeah, you mentioned vintage comics. The vintage comic that I always go for whenever I go to either San Diego Comic-Con or any con I go to, WonderCon, Phoenix Comic-Con, I always go for the what ifs. There's always a long box filled with what ifs. I loved those as a kid. I love reading those now. That series has sort of come and gone, but I love that idea, and I'm excited that there's going to be some Disney Plus animated show of what ifs, which sounds pretty cool. But I feel like everybody has that when I actually, because I used to go to Dave's Comics, it's like I think that every comic fan would almost describe comic books as in some way like an addiction. Okay, it's one of the more positive addictions, let's be honest. I mean, you're not gonna, I mean, you might drown in a sea of comics. I know, I had a garage full of long boxes, but when I moved from the Detroit area where I shopped at Dave's Comics, bought my comics from Dave Huxley, moved here in '89. I had to discover a new comic shop. It was Golden Apple Comics on Melrose Avenue. And what's funny is that when you talk to people who move around the country, one of the things is like, okay, where's my movie theater? Where's the grocery store? Where's my comic shop? I'm fortunate enough to live in an area that has a lot of comic shops, but I feel for them. I live in Pasadena now, and there are two comic shops here, Comics Paradise and Comics Factory. And I want to see them survive. I want to see them, thrive and survive. What I do like is in the doc, one of the things that you cover, I'm so happy that you did this. It's kind of a funny segment. You talk about Funko Pops.
Yeah.
And the thing is this, I'll just say, I do not collect Funko Pops, but I have Funko Pops because people I feel like you will get sucked in. Right? Like even my girlfriend, who is not a nerd by any means, she appreciates nerd culture. She likes the Marvel movies and Star Wars movies, but she has Funko Pops. How is it that Funko Pops are so, I mean, one, they're cheap, but there's every comic shop you go into, there's a wall and, I'll look at it. God, I saw one, it was just a couple weeks ago. I saw Paul Atreides from Dune. Kyle MacLachlan as Paul Atreides, and I was and I didn't get it. It was actually at Amoeba Records in LA. They had that. Maybe when they reopen, I got to go get it. But tell me about some of the other segments that you explore in the doc. That's what I love about this doc. Is it really looked at all aspects as it relates to comic shops.
Thanks. And so, well, I'll address the pops of it all first. So
thanks.
My wife and I do collect pops. We've cooled a little bit, but it's something that, like, early on when we were dating, it was fun and we got into that. And we don't have a crazy collection, but we have over 100, so it's a decent amount. I think why they're so popular is they are relatively cheap. I mean, they're about $10, so way less than if you were to buy a statue, for example. And they they have the license for almost every, movie, game, TV show, comic book that you could ask for. I mean, I saw a Pat Sajak recently. I mean, so if you're a big Wheel of Fortune fan, you're covered. So they cover so much, and I think that's part of the appeal. I loved using them as that little lightning rod in the film because I think it really exemplifies this divide between the more old school stores and the ones who have diversified a little bit. And the fact that I happen to be a fan of, like, I like the Pops, but I also get why some of the more old school guys object to it. So I thought it was perfect to kind of illustrate that tension. But as far as the different areas that the film covers, that was really important to me. I wanted, obviously, the retailers are at the heart of this, and we spend a good amount of time talking about the challenges in ordering and getting books on the shelf and gauging interest and all of that. But it was important to me that we talked about the Pops and this tension between the different types of stores. It was important that we address the collectability aspect of this, which, as much as the community is such a big driver in getting people into the stores, there's also this other real thing, and you were getting at this before with the addiction. I mean, people, there's a real compulsive element there, and so I wanted to address that as well. And then, we do have a couple of creators and a couple of publishers in the movie as well, and that was important to me to have as many different perspectives as possible, because as much of this comes from the retailers, and they give the stores their personality and their flavor, but there are, again, creators and publishers and collectors and customers who interact with the shops. And it was important to me from the start that we, covered as many bases as possible to give you those different perspectives and show you how those pieces kind of fit together.
Yeah, I just think that, like, you captured something that you cannot explain to someone who doesn't regularly go to a comic shop. I don't really, like I say, I can buy comics. You can buy comics on Amazon. You can buy mostly graphic novels, right? But you can't have that conversation. You can't have that. And I do depend on the people who work at comic shops to give recommendations, right? I think everybody has their favorite person that they like gravitate to when they go to the comic shop. It's like, okay, let's pick up that conversation we were talking about the Fantastic Four. All right. Well, the Kirby Lee run, through the first 100 issues of Fantastic Four is classic, or just like whatever it is. There are those kind of ongoing conversations and threads that I think that is the reason that so many people go. Let's pivot a little bit, because obviously you're such a fan. You know about all this stuff. What do you think about Marvel movies? And what I like is you didn't really talk about this so much in the doc. The doc is really focused on comic shops, but I think the thing that I do appreciate about the Marvel films is it's the most true vision that kind of captures the best part of why we loved comics. It was an ongoing story being told. It was, and the universes are rebooted. I think that we're going to see that in the next 10 years with Marvel in a way. With the multiverse, I have a theory that I think the next decade of Marvel is all going to be about fixing the multiverse that was created when they defeated Thanos. That all of this is leading to a multiverse that has to be solved because it created a rift in time when anyways, we could go on and on. But comic books, it's interesting to see when you read a comic for a certain amount of time, usually a run is defined by an artist-writer team. You get that artist-writer team, and it's like that's the team, whether it's like Kirby Lee for, or just like so many, or Marv Wolfman, with X-Men. There's so many different and I do love when there's reboots, or even when Marvel tried to start that one line, it was they had Star Brand and the Nom and all of those. And when DC kind of rebooted, they had multiverses, and there was Crisis on Infinite Earths, which I think the CW did their best. To me, it kind of came off as a little bit like a fan film. It was like clearly anemic budget. So it was a little fan filmish. At the same time, I remember reading Crisis on Infinite Earths and freaking out. Those George Perez, you know what I'm talking about? George Perez, who's the artist on Crisis on Infinite Earths. There are these these spreads that are just like, oh my God, there's like 3 Robins in here or whatever. I mean, what are your thoughts on comic book movies and how they've tried to emulate the thing that makes comics great, which is telling an ongoing story?
Yeah, I think the CW shows, the Arrowverse and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, are probably our best examples of that. I am a fan of both. I will admit my interest in the Arrowverse has kind of diminished a little bit. I think they would do really well to shorten the seasons. I think that would make
Mm.
a vast difference, but I still enjoy it overall. And I think, with Crisis in particular, what they were able to accomplish on a television budget and schedule, production wise, I think was really impressive. Um, so no, I mean, I'm a fan of both. I mean, as far as appeasing comics fans, that's a losing proposition. I know, fans
Yeah.
are, and I think that's one of the things about comics and the adaptations that make it really tricky, because people have very specific visions of the characters in their head, and it's not even just based on imagination. It's not like reading a novel and there's a description of a character and you picture it, and then it's on screen and maybe it's a little different, but it is what it is. But with comics, there's literally a visual representation on the page, and I think that might be one of the things that makes it a little bit harder to appease comics fans, because the image, it's not just in their imagination. I mean, they're seeing it. So when something kind of deviates from that, I know sometimes fans are it's challenging. But no, I mean, I've been a fan of both. I'm way more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy, though I enjoy Marvel. So when I'm watching the Marvel movies, it's almost never from the perspective of, I really hope it's truthful to the comics. As long as it captures the spirit of the character and it's an engaging movie, I'm happy. On the DC side, yeah, I'm probably a little bit more more like the old school fan. But even that, I like to think I'm relatively open-minded as far as the depictions. I think as long as you're capturing the spirit of the character, that's the most important thing. When you get into adapting a specific storyline, then I might be a little bit more nitpicky, I guess. But yeah, no, I'm definitely a fan of both of those.
Well, first of all, I agree with everything that you said. I think that the problem with the CW is that there's just too many episodes, right? So they almost become meaningless, or a lot of episodes become filler episodes. It's like, do we really need a B storyline that's really not all that interesting? I feel like it's more meaningful when you have movies, which and I want to get your opinion on this, really kind of liked where Zack Snyder was going with this DC universe.
Yes,
It
yes.
was a deconstruction of heroes. One of my favorite novels, science fiction novels that I read it every year in high school, which was Dune by Frank Herbert. And that book I just devoured. And it's kind of people misinterpret that book. That novel it's a deconstruction of the hero's journey. It's Paul Atreides foresees that he will basically become Hitler, right? He will become this, and how can he stop that or mitigate those losses? It's about, we should be mistrustful of charismatic heroes, and I feel like Zack Snyder explored some of those themes in Batman v Superman. It's like, who are these gods to say that they have this kind of ability to do whatever they want? I liked that he at least touched on these issues. I like that he took these iconic characters, and he, with Man of Steel, which I think holds up much better than some Marvel movies. I look back, I think that movie was too big of a shock for people when it initially came out. And I think there are some tone issues towards the end that maybe didn't work. There's a scene where Jenny Olsen is trapped and Perry White is there trying to help her, and the whole thing, the expectation would be, well, Superman's going to swoop in and save her, except he doesn't. He's busy doing other stuff, but they're inspired to stay and put their own lives at risk to save Jenny Olsen. That was the point of that scene. I think so I'm a Man of Steel defender. I think that in retrospect it holds up better. I liked where he was going and what he set up with BVS, Batman v Superman. But where do you stand on the Snyder Cut? I want to hear what your thoughts are on the Snyder Cut. I hear rumors it really doesn't exist, but
Boy, I'm so glad. I didn't know that this was going to go here, but I'm so glad that it has. And
good.
I liked you already, but I like you even more now, because I'm a proponent of Zack Snyder and his vision as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been unfairly maligned. I'm a release the Snyder Cut supporter. I mean, I don't know, from what we've heard from people like Jason Momoa and other people who say they've seen it, and Snyder's own claims. I mean, it seems like it exists. I mean, I guess the big debate is how finished is it, and especially with respect to the effects. But I don't know. Jason Momoa gave an interview where someone brought that up, and he was like, "Oh, you don't think Zach finished it?" So even if it was something he worked on his own, I feel like there's a very watchable version of this movie that's out there. But with respect to the prior two films, I mean, I'm with you 100%. I remember when one of the first trailers for Man of Steel came out, and there's the scene where Jonathan is talking to young Clark and chastising him for risking exposure when he saved the kids on the school bus. And Clark says, well, what should I have done? Let them die? And Jonathan was like, maybe. And I remember people talking about this at the comic shop. Everyone was up in arms over this. I'm a new father. I have a 7-month-old at home, and there is nothing that I wouldn't do or tell him to do or not do if it were to protect him. So even back then, though, I kind of was of that perspective that it's like, well, if you're a father, you will do anything to protect your son. And no, does it line up with the Jonathan Kent we know from the comics and the other shows and the movies where he's really pushing Clark to go out? No, but I felt like it rang true for me. And yeah, I agree. I think, people really had issues with the tone of both movies, but I really feel like, Snyder had a reason for it and he was going somewhere with it. And I would love to see what he had in store for Justice League, because the version we got, left a lot to be desired. And I've gone down a few rabbit holes on the internet, like YouTube videos comparing the footage of the two cuts and everything. And, I would really love to see where he was going with that. And I assume you've probably seen the extended edition of Batman v Superman.
Of course, yes.
And that, for people who were kind of cold on that movie, I really encourage them to watch that, because I think plot-wise, at least, it really rounds out a lot. It fills a lot in. And I think it makes for a much more cohesive overall story. So, no, yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah, well, the thing that intrigues me is the vision that Bruce Wayne had, right, when the suddenly appears to him, and you see the Flash, like, okay, what's this message? And then that nightmare vision with Batman in this apocalyptic future with all these sort of legions of armed guards dressed with the suit. I mean, like, how cool was that? Where was that going? What was this alternate future? And everyone forgets when they talk about release the Snyder Cut, it was supposed to be 2 movies. Justice League Part 1, Justice League Part 2. They announced a slate, just like Marvel does with their phases. I mean, and Marvel, to be fair, Marvel has, moved those things around. I mean, the Inhumans was on the feature slate for a while, right? And that kind of got moved around. So Marvel has made changes for a number of reasons. I think for good reasons. And this, they announced a whole slate. There was going to be a Cyborg feature, like everyone was going to get their own feature, a Flash feature, right? All of these things, and it was going to be, Justice League Part 1 and 2 was supposed to be an epic. I mean, I believe with BVS would have been a trilogy, right? These 3 films would have been a trilogy about the Justice League. But the Justice League movie we got was more like Super Friends. It was the Super Friends, which I grew up with that show. I liked that show as a kid. They didn't fight all that much. They were mostly protecting, and there were a lot of goofy elements to it, but that's kind of the tone of the Justice League movie we ended up getting. I really wanted to see, because what Snyder was doing was different than the Marvel Universe. It was something wholly different, and I really wanted to see where that was going to go. It's not, everyone sort of holds up Richard Donner's Superman, the movie, as the sort of quintessential, this is how you do a superhero movie. And Christopher Nolan, in the extras on there's a Dark Knight trilogy box set that you can get, and one of the extras on it is a 1 hour or so conversation that Christopher Nolan has with Richard Donner. He basically interviews Richard Donner and tells him that the original Superman movie was the inspiration for his Batman Begins movie, and his pitch to Warner Brothers was, I want to do Superman the movie, but I'm going to do it with Batman. And there really is sort of a building. If you go back, those movies hold up, and I would say about half of The Dark Knight Rises holds up. Although I will say this, I happen to know that there was a different cut that Christopher Nolan had. I know people talk about the Snyder Cut all the time. You know that there's a different cut of The Dark Knight Rises, that movie was about an hour longer.
Oh,
and
no, I didn't know.
And yeah, so I know this because I just know people who work in, lower places. It's good to know people who work in high places, but people that work in smaller places, they know a lot too. And there was an original cut of that movie, and he was forced by Warner Brothers to deliver a much shorter version. Even though Dark Knight Rises is still longish, there was I really feel like there's a natural place in that movie that kind of feels like this is where there should be an intermission. And I think I had a conversation, oddly enough, with Leonard Maltin of all people. We talked about when was the last time there was an intermission in a movie, and we figured out it was Gandhi in 1982.
Huh, okay.
So weird. Gandhi had an intermission with Ben Kingsley. So in any case, I feel like maybe Dark Knight Rises could have existed in that form. Maybe Justice League Part 1 and 2, like that could have had an intermission. I think there's an argument to be made that that maybe certain movies should charge a premium, like if it's a big blockbuster, and then a film like I love these indie movies that show up on VOD and they're $9.99. It's like, it's cheaper for me to just buy it now on Vudu than it is to just go to the theater where it may or may not be playing. So this is another plug to just get your movie on VOD or see it by any means necessary that is legal, where you're giving you money.
I appreciate that.
And I know you benefit. At FilmStar, we support indie filmmakers. We want, these are I always say you need a balanced diet. You can't exist on blockbusters alone. You can't live on a diet of Disney, Star Wars, Pixar, Marvel. If you only watch those movies, it would be like eating fast food all the time. It's not healthy. So you have to have a balanced diet. You know what? I feel like I say this every other episode of the podcast, but it bears repeating.
Yeah, no, it's very true.
But I really wanted to see where Zach was going to go with it. I know that he recently hosted sort of a live stream where he was answering questions with Batman v Superman, and he teased some things, but I'm not sure if an actual cut exists. I hope one day, because it would not be unprecedented to release an unfinished movie. My understanding is that most of the big scenes from the film were in previs stage, so not incomplete. Having said that, Jeffrey Katzenberg, when he was at Disney, theatrically released in limited release an anniversary version of Beauty and the Beast. I don't know if you remember this. And it was the hand-drawn version. It was the rough, it was the movie. So the audio was almost finished in the songs, and there were a couple things in there, like deleted scenes that were not in the finished animated version of Beauty and the Beast, but it was all hand-drawn. It was basically the animatics for the movie, and they released it. I'm sure you can see it in some form on an old DVD, but so it wouldn't be unprecedented to, I think, putting it in context. I mean, as a filmmaker yourself, you've probably seen your movie in rough form.
Sure.
100 times.
Yeah.
And showed it to people. So you and I are used to seeing films. The sound's not finished. I always, when a filmmaker sends me their movie, it's not done. It's like, I know, I've seen it. It's all good. I know the sound's going to sound much better. It's not, to me, I always look for the content. I don't care about technical flaws. I know that they're all going to be fixed, but it wouldn't be unprecedented to release the Snyder Cut in an unfinished animatic form, maybe with something that kind of guides you along the way, almost like Zack Snyder pitching you the movie. Have him do some sort of, a lot of directors sometimes for deleted scenes or different cuts of their film, they'll film a little intro of themselves talking about it. I'd like to see it. What's the holdup?
No, I agree. And I think the people who are proponents of #release the Snyder Cut, I think the people who want to see this version of the movie, I think would be perfectly fine, whether it was on HBO Max and they subscribed to it and got to see it, or it was a Blu-ray or a VOD. I mean, that really doesn't matter what the delivery mechanism is. I think people who want to see this version would go to it wherever it is. And I think exactly what you're describing, I think that would be perfectly fine. If it were storyboards or some animation, or if he just got on screen and said, this is what was going to happen in this scene, I feel like people would be okay with that. I think we just want to see, what the story was going to be. So, it really seems like there's such a movement behind it. And, you even have prominent members of the cast championing it as well. So and there's been some changing of the guard right at Warner Brothers, and I feel like it's only a matter of time. I get the arguments against why you would maybe want to put out a competing version of it, but at the same time, if there's money to be made, it's like, why leave it on the table? And
Right.
they've moved away enough from the initial vision for the shared cinematic universe that I don't think it would really undermine what they're doing now.
Right.
The movies have been much more standalone, so I don't know. I feel like at this point now, the reward is outweighing the risk. And maybe a year or two ago, that wasn't the case, but now I think it is. So I would be really surprised if we never see this. I really think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the context. In what context are we going to see it? Is it Zack Snyder leading us along the way? I mean, I've been fortunate enough to see some pitches from friends in the industry. They pitch their movie, and you've heard a good pitch before. You feel like you've seen the movie. Like the way someone who's really good at pitching a vision for a film, you can see it. And since we already have the elements, which were that first trailer, the first trailer is footage that was from Zack Snyder's cut. That first trailer where almost none of the footage. I mean, the one thing that clearly shifted was the tone.
Yes.
I think the thing that scared Warner Brothers was people don't like this tone. People don't like this tone. It's different than Marvel. It's something that grows on you. The movies that I revisit are, to me, the ones that challenge me. I know I may sound like a freak, but I watched 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. I watch that film every week. Now, normally I keep it on in the background while I'm doing some mundane task on my computer, but I put that film on every week. And it just inspires me. Like, I haven't seen something science fiction wise that surpasses this. I know Chris Nolan tried with Inception to kind of touch on that. I know Star Trek: The Motion Picture also aspired to have more deep and meaningful themes. Robert Wise's version, and there is a director's cut of that, by the way, that my friend Darren Doctorman worked on the effects. I'd like him to do the HD version of that film. I want to see that in 4K. But I think that mixed with a pitch, I think you could see it. So I don't understand. It's got to be something. I don't know. There's got to be some rift between Warner Brothers and Zack Snyder, and I think that's part of it. It's a lot of stuff that I mean, I'm privy to so many weird things that happen in this industry, and it's just a lot of to put it crudely, it's a lot of dick measuring that happens, and a lot of like unnecessary, ego and BS that rules a lot of decisions at the higher levels, which is unfortunate. But back to let's bring it all back to your film, which is now available to see on Amazon Prime and for purchase everywhere on VOD. My Comic Shop Country. I have to admit, I got choked up at the end of your film. I don't want to give too much away, but it does document the closing of a comic book store in 2015, Alternate Realities, how it affected everyone there, the sense of community. I got choked up because I remember this is, I think if you talk to any comic book fan and they're honest, they would tell you, I don't go to my comic shop to buy comics. I go there for the community. You capture that, and I just want to thank you for that. So do you have any final thoughts? Maybe some things you didn't get to express in the doc, but I say you do it very well. I mean, you got me choked up thinking about my memories of going to Dave's Comics, all through high school and college.
I mean, it honestly means so much to hear that because, as you know, it's like so much of this is a solitary process, especially when I'm editing. I mean, that more than anything else, it's me in front of a computer. And so, you make all these choices and I'm recording my narration and it's like, you have no idea how it's going to be received. And so, to get a reaction like that is extremely gratifying. And, a lot of people have been commenting on social media or messaging me and, saying something similar and that it made them, want to reach out to their local comic shop or, it brought back memories of maybe a store that they're not near anymore, but that they used to go to. So that really means a lot. And, the ending is emotional for me. There's a line that, the former owner of Alternate Realities, he has a line in there where he says, You know, I created a good memory. Like I felt like I didn't make a good, like an impression on the world, but then I realized like I made some good memories for these people, and that was all I needed to do. And that always gets me. And, you know, ultimately this really comes from a place of love. Like I really had a meaningful experience at the store where I went. You know, it was a time in my life I didn't have other people who shared my passion for comics. And I think that's probably one of the things that unites a lot of comics people who go to these stores. You know, if you don't have someone else to talk to, and, you know, now, yes, there are online forums, there are other ways to connect, and that's wonderful. And these days, that's what that's all we have. But, you know, having that face to face, and, you know, going back to the beginning about how timely this movie is now, you know, we're at a point, all of us are craving that face to face. And so, you know, you get that at the comic shop, and thankfully, you know, glad that it comes across in the movie. And if, you know, people watch that and it, you know, conjures those feelings, you know, then I've done my job. So, no, I'm so glad that you enjoyed it, and I appreciate having the opportunity to do this.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much for talking to us on the Film Threat podcast. Where can people follow you on social media and get more information?
Sure. So as far as the documentary, the social media handles, it's My Comic Shop Country on Facebook, My Comic Shop Country Movie on Instagram, and My Comic Shop Doc on Twitter. And then my podcast is called My Comic Shop History, and that's available on Apple Podcasts and most other major podcast platforms. So I hope people check that out.
Great. Anthony, thank you so much for talking to us on the Film Threat podcast. It's I really loved your film, and I cannot recommend it enough. Seriously, amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
All right. That was terrific. Thank you so much.